The elements of art and the principles of design are the backbone of art. What are they? The elements of art are the parts. They're the small pieces. They structure and carry the work. They're the things that you can really pinpoint and explain and describe. The principles of design are a little tougher to explain. They're more like concepts. They affect the content and the message of artwork. And in order to create a principle, you use multiple elements together, and the way you use those elements creates a principle. So we'll look at it a little bit more. Here are the elements of art: line, shape, value, form, space, texture, and color. These are simple words that you've known for a very long time and probably have a good understanding of what they mean in general. But when you look at artwork and you try to explain them, sometimes it gets a little bit more difficult. So we'll take a look at each one. These images are examples of line. Now there are examples of other things too, but we're going to focus on line. So a line is any point from A to B. A line is a stroke of movement with your pencil or your pen or whatever you're using to make a mark that shows motion, and it connects 2 points. It can be vertical, straight up and down, it can be horizontal, it can be diagonal, curved, straight, zigzag, dashed. You can come up with a lot of different words for lines. And the way we describe these lines is what we're usually looking for when an art teacher would ask a student, can you describe the line in this artwork? That's when you would really try to find those descriptive words to explain what you're seeing. Shapes. Shapes are an area that's enclosed, so it's a line that is connected all the way around. Shapes can be geometric or organic. This one always stumps students every year when I say shapes can be organic. I don't mean like organic produce. I mean they can be kind of a random shape. That's what we would call an organic shape. Or if you talk about the outline of a piece of fruit or a vegetable, those are often very organic shapes. They come from nature. They just they're not geometric shapes. Geometric shapes are more those, math shapes that we know that we always strive for perfection for with our circle. But those are shapes, and shapes are flat. Then we get to value. Value is that lightness to darkness. It's the various shades of any given color. The light on sculptures create value also, which can dramatically affect an artwork. So if you take a shape and you add value to it, it becomes something else, which is our next slide. It becomes a form. Forms are three-dimensional. Forms show an object in space, the mass or positive space that it occupies. And usually we talk about it just in 3D terms, although we do talk about it in drawing, like the image on your right, that if you create shadow, so you use that concept of value on a shape, then you can create the look of a form. So you can create something that looks like it's three-dimensional. You can create something that looks like it's hollow. Piece, which is what that picture is if you didn't know. You can tell that that piece goes in because of the value of it. The top left one I always find kind of funny because it is a line. So it's this kind of curly line, almost like a curly French fry or something. But it's not just a flat shape like a flat line. It is a three-dimensional line. So the artist has given this sculpture form by creating multiple dimensions. Space. Space is something that we need to think about where we put objects on a page. There's a lot of asymmetry that we tend to look for symmetry in life, I think, but a lot of artwork lately, I feel like, is very asymmetrical. But what we're really looking for is kind of the balance between the positive and negative space. So you're really trying to balance the like visual weight out. Texture is another piece, another element that is created usually with value when you're talking, especially when you're talking on a two-dimensional surface. So when you're drawing the fur of those animals, you have to create different value shades in order to create the look of texture. It's also the way the lines are put down. So if you look at the, kind of the curve of the fur, the cat's fur is a little bit more straight, and then the dog's fur has a little bit more of a curve to it to show kind of the difference in those textures. When you're talking about three-dimensional objects, like clay or stone here, or it's probably not stone, it's probably bronze, you create that value, carve something, or the way you attach something, and getting something to really pop with the value is to really create a texture that has a lot of depth to it, so you can see the texture really well because of that high value contrast that you get. But texture, it can be how the surface actually feels, so like real or implied texture. On a piece of paper, you can't actually feel it, but it's implied that you would be able to if that animal was real. Color. There's a lot of pieces to color, and there's a lot of terms associated with color, and it's something that we will spend some more time on when we really start talking, getting into coloring our first piece. But color is made up of three pieces: the hue, which is what we tend to call the color: red, orange, blue, violet. The intensity, so how bright or dark the color could be. So we can have a really intense, bright red, like the red of our flag, or we can have kind of a deeper, darker, I want to say deeper, not darker, deeper value, deeper intensity, like blood red. But then there's also value, and intensity and value sometimes can be confusing, and just the words can be confusing, but value is the lightness to darkness. So intensity is bright to dull, value is light to dark. So if you're talking about the hue of red, your lightest value of red is actually pink, right? Or very pale, pale pink. But you can also have a very dark, dark red. But if you want to bring the intensity of a red down, that's a little bit different than just being darker. With color, there are also many color schemes. You can have complementary, analogous, and then of course there's primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. The relationship between the colors can affect the artwork and your meaning in the artwork, so it is something worth thinking about when you choose the coloring of your pieces. So moving on to the principles of design, these are those concepts. So these take the usage of the elements together to create some of these things. So there's repetition, pattern, and rhythm. They all kind of go together. Usually in the list, if you look up a list of principles of design, you're going to see pattern and rhythm. And there's another one on here, scale, that you might not actually see on the list, but I like to include it because it is kind of its own thing. Movement, contrast, scale, emphasis, balance, and unity. So when we talk about repetition, and I put this in here to help you understand that repeating one element is not a pattern. In this sculpture on the left, this is just a repetition. It's one element that is repeated. It's exactly the same. It is a blue form repeated. So that's just a repetition. So that's one object or shape repeated. A pattern is a combination of elements or shapes that are repeated in a recurring or regular arrangement. So they don't really change. They are the same. So if you look at this little pattern, fabric or tapestry, the pattern in each zigzag line is the same, and it continues one after another. Okay, but then there's a thing called rhythm, and this one's a little bit trickier, but I like to think of it as a pattern that has a little bit of movement to it. So it's a combination of elements that are repeated, but it has some variations. So if you're looking at this image, now this would not be in real life. If I'm going down the staircase, it is not rhythm by itself. It's the photograph that has rhythm, because if you are looking down this staircase, you get a sense of movement, that it goes around because of the lines that go around, but you also see that kind of repeated pattern of the stairs, where it's kind of dark and then light and dark and light, dark and light. Well, as you go down around the staircase, if you let your eyes follow the staircase all the way down, you notice, or you can notice, that the stairs get smaller and smaller as you go down. And even the lighter color stripes get darker as you go down, and they get thinner and closer together. So the repetition of that pattern of those stairs and those shapes, it changes. They get smaller as they go down. They actually even change in color. So that's a rhythm. Movement, I mentioned this. Movement is the motion that's created in a work of art. So it can be captured motion in a photograph. It can be implied motion that's achieved through line or actual motion in a sculpture. So all three of these pieces, bus or train station, you have that rushing by, and you can tell that there's movement there because we recognize the movement of light. In the drawing, you can, obviously this is a picture that shows the woman, that she's the artist that's actually moving her arms to create this work, right? But if you looked at that image just by itself, that artwork, you're going to have this big sense of movement just because of the way the lines are. And then in sculpture, of course, you can actually have movement. So like these hanging mobiles, that's an Alexander Calder mobile, you can actually have movement. And those are all created with various elements. Contrast. Contrast is one of my favorite principles to work with, because it's creating a large difference of elements when they're placed next to each other in a work of art. So if you look at this yellow, it's a yellow trash can in a bathroom, to give you a little context. When you look at that yellow trash can, it is yellow in a all black and white room. So there is contrast in color there. There's also contrast in shape, because it's round and cylindrical, and everything around it is very square and straight. The lines of it, the lines are circular, everything else behind it is straight. So there's a lot of contrast here, and that's probably why it's a somewhat pleasing image to your eye, even though that's just a photograph of a bathroom. I put the word contrast up there because I want you to notice that when you look at that word contrast in red and you look at the edges, what do you see? My guess is you're going to see kind of a dark line around each letter, or almost, it might almost hurt your eyes. It might look like it's kind of vibrating. And we call those vibrating boundaries. It's because those colors, that red and green, are the same intensity and the same value. And so when you do that in two different hues, those the boundary between them kind of plays little tricks with our eyes, and that dark outline that you see is not actually there. So you have to kind of know those things to maybe prevent it, or maybe to do it on purpose. The other work down here on the right, I like to point out that contrast can also be a contrast of ideas. So to me, this artwork is showing the puppet. So if you know the story of Pinocchio, Pinocchio is held up by his strings by Geppetto. This is a contrast in that idea. This is the puppet holding up the man. And so with, you know, current culture, if you know things about culture or current culture, current trends, you can play with the contrast of that. And honestly, I think that's why memes are so popular, because we play with kind of the contrast of our general knowledge. Scale is one that's not always on the list, like I said, when you look up what the elements of art or the principles of design are. But it really is a principle, is something that you create by the use of size, the use of shape and line sometimes. But it's really like playing with the scale of your artwork can change the meaning. And it's not always something you can create on a scale like this. This guy's artwork is humongous, and that's not necessarily something we can do in here, but if you're drawing things even on a small scale, I had a student make a mouse and a cat once, and they decided to make the mouse big and the cat really small to change that idea of, like, you know, what would happen if it was the other way around. So it is something to mention and to think about, that the relationship of one object to another really can have a lot of impact on your artwork. Emphasis. I generally like to ask people which apple stands out more, and you guys can make that decision for yourself. But emphasis is when one area in a work of art stands out more than another. So that part is what catches your attention first, and that can be done in so many different ways. We can do it with line, we can do it with color, we can do it by like scale, in relation to the viewer's eyes. So, you know, in the top right image, we're all probably looking at that red apple because it's the one red apple in amongst the green apples. And then on the bottom, that one apple that's sitting on the grass, we're looking at the apple. Why are we looking at the apple? Because it's the only apple in the picture, or because the smoothness of the apple is contrasted with the texture of the grass, so we're able to really pick out that apple even though it's all green. In the image where the apple is on the road or playground or wherever that is, and in the town, it's a horrible photograph, and I apologize for that because it's fuzzy, but it's something that I wanted to point out, that the scale of that apple is important, and we are looking at that apple because it's in the foreground, because it's bigger than the house. If the photograph was taken a little bit differently, I think it'd be a little bit more effective, but it is, you know, showing that the emphasis is on that apple. It could have been done a little bit better, which is something that I want you guys to recognize. I don't always want to show you perfect pieces. The shadow is really on our, you know, the side we're viewing of the apple, and if it was a little bit brighter, that might have helped too. But because the apple is so big, that is where our eye is looking generally. Balance is a huge piece of artwork. All of your artwork, no matter what it is, should be balanced, whether it's a symmetrical balance or asymmetrical balance, or if you're going to do a radial design. Balance is the arrangement than any other part. The three different kinds, as I said, are symmetrical, asymmetrical, and radial. Symmetrical balance is the most stable in a visual sense, but asymmetrical is something that I feel like we're more drawn to nowadays. You can think of it as symmetry is when you look at yourself in the mirror and you just stare straight ahead at yourself. That is symmetrical balance. Now, symmetrical doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical. You know, if you've ever taken a picture and like of yourself, or like tried to draw yourself with, you know, two right sides of your face, you know, we're not the most symmetrical beings. Like we're pretty symmetrical, but we're not perfectly symmetrical, and that's okay. It's just the general, like, if I'm gonna put, you know, an eyeball on this side, I'm gonna put an eyeball on this side. So it's the same on both sides. You can kind of cut it in half and it's the same. Asymmetry is that there's still that visual weight that's balanced out, but it's not exactly the same on both sides. So if you're looking at that Mona Lisa picture, she's not staring straight at you. Her head is tilted, her body is tilted, her arms are different. So if you cut that image down the center, it's not exactly the same on both sides. Down on the bottom, that one is pretty symmetrical. You have the lamps on either side in about the same position. You have the trees just about in the same position on either side. It's not perfectly symmetrical. It's not a mirror image side to side, but it's symmetrical enough that we kind of get that sense of visual balance. And this mandala that is being created is definitely a radial, like, you know, pizza, the same on each side, each little triangle quadrant is exactly the same. The last one is unity, and this one gets tough to explain when you're trying to explain, because you want to just give this kind of definition, the feeling of wholeness or parts belonging together. Why does it have unity, Mrs. Levitt? Because everything goes together. You can't really say that. So when we're trying to talk about artwork, which we will be doing, you have to try to pinpoint some things of why this shows unity. If you're looking at this painting by Renoir, if you look at his use of white and just focus on where you see white throughout this painting, you'll notice that even in the more shadowy area of the picture, which would be kind of the lower right-hand side, there is still a use of bright white. It's less, but it's still there. And I think that use of white right down to kind of the glasses on the table, they balance with the lamps and lights that are hanging up in the top left. If you look at painting style, his painting style obviously is the same all around the painting because he painted it, but he really tried to keep those the strokes the same throughout. You could also say, you know, having done the hats of the men, you can see that color in the hats throughout and even all the way back in the distance. And even though it's back in the distance, there's not very much detail to it, and they are all wearing those, and you can, that brings the whole piece together, and you can really kind of look through the crowd to wonder what the people are doing in the background. So whenever you talk about unity, you have to try to pinpoint a few things to make sense of it. So that is it.
Thank you for listening to my ramblings. It's not as much fun to go over a slideshow sitting in my empty classroom. It's way more fun with students in my class, but it's quicker this way. I want you to know that there are a ton of resources out there on the internet for the elements of art and principles of design. Sometimes when you look them up, the lists are a little bit different. But if you kind of stick to the ones that I gave you, those are the ones that we use in class. But take a look, ask for more resources if you want. There's a lot of museum websites that will have some videos to explain things as well. So take the time to do your own research so you truly understand what these terms mean and how to use them. And we're going to practice a lot. We're going to start simple. You start by picking out the elements in each work, because we all know what lines are, we all know what shapes are, and it's easy to identify. So we start there and we build up to trying to be able to explain principles within the artwork. And then we can kind of move on and talk about what's probably more fun, artist's intention, our ideas of beauty, what we think a piece of artwork is saying, which sometimes is different than what the artist's intention is. So we're going to do a lot of fun activities this year on how to talk about art, and hopefully you guys can gain some confidence in that. So thanks. And as I'm probably going to say a lot throughout the semester, I want you guys to be brave. If you are brave, you can be creative. So be brave to be creative. Bye.